Hey folks, I'm JC from One Shot Adventures, and today I'm going to review the Lightless Beacon, an introductory horror adventure for Call of Cthulhu. Now, Call of Cthulhu has some really excellent starter scenarios. Go ask on any Call of Cthulhu fan group and you'll get some great suggestions, ranging from Edge of Darkness, a classic investigation of an abandoned house filled with mystic secrets, Blackwater Creek, which lets players either play as academics or criminal bootleggers as they explored old colonial settlement, or the haunted house classic, The Haunting. Hey guys, I think I just saw that bed move. Ah! Starter scenarios are really important for RPGs, especially ones that veer from the more traditional fantasy tropes of Dungeons and Dragons. After all, I think it's fair to say that most RPG fans these days come into the hobby from Dungeons and Dragons, and that's going to influence how they come into a brand new game or genre, like the horror of Call of Cthulhu. I think that people who have been RPG fans for a while forget that it's not always easy for new GMs or new players to jump from a system like D&D to another one that often provides a very different feel. And moving from an action-heavy, heroic, cinematic game of D&D to something like Call of Cthulhu, where death is like one gunshot away and sanity is shredded just for seeing a dead body, and for adventurers to succeed or fail based on investigation and clue finding, well, that can be a big jump for new players. And this is why it's so great that Call of Cthulhu has so many strong starter scenarios. Because every player group is different, so GMs need to pick an adventure that will showcase all the fun of horror without being so different from what the players are used to that they just end up yearning for their D20s and killing hobgoblins again. For example, players who love exploration will find themselves right at home in a scenario like The Haunting, which is all about exploring a haunted house and piecing kind of what happened to the house together. But players who are used to fast pace and action or lots of NPC interaction may find it slow or just unclear what to do. And there's just so many ways to play a game like Call of Cthulhu, from like serious investigations with lots of tough to find clues to scenarios where a Tommy gun is just going to buy you enough time so you can complete a ritual that's going to banish the elder beast back to his dimension. There's just not a single scenario that equally balances everything that goes on in a game like Call of Cthulhu, so it's important that GMs pick a starter scenario that's right for their group. Enter the Lightless Beacon, one of the newest introductory adventures written just a few years ago. The adventure strands the investigators on a remote island off the coast of Massachusetts, where they have to find a way to escape. And the lighthouse that's the center of this island has suddenly and inexplicably gone dark. Of course, the investigators will soon discover that there's something deeply unsettling that has happened on this island. Now, unlike some of those classic Call of Cthulhu adventures I mentioned, like The Haunting and Edge of Darkness, which were written decades ago, the Lightless Beacon is more recent, and is therefore written from a perspective that's more attuned to modern role-playing. But does the Lightless Beacon compare to those classics? Does it grip new players in the same way as those other adventures? Well, grab your oars, put on your sailor's coat, and get ready for some spoilers, because not only am I going to give you a full review of the Lightless Beacon, I'm also going to give you GMs some tips and tricks on how to run this one like a pro. The Lightless Beacon is a free starter adventure that you can get on chaosium.com. It's written by Lee Carr and Lynn Hardy, and it runs about 43 pages. But this includes handouts, pre-generated characters, and lots of first-time GM advice, all of which I love to see in adventures. While 40 pages sounds long for a one-shot adventure, the Lightless Beacon can easily be run in just one session. And as a result, you'll see this adventure featured a lot at game conventions. Whenever I've run it, I find it runs in about 2 or 3 hours. There's even an option included in the book to run the Lightless Beacon in 1 hour, but my advice is to stay away from that option. It just requires you to practically use a stopwatch to time events like down to the minute, and I just don't think anyone will walk away impressed by Call of Cthulhu if you try to run it that way. The setup of the adventure is this. It's 1926, and a few months ago, an unmarked ship loaded with ancient cultist gold was heading to Innsmouth, Massachusetts. Unfortunately, the Beacon Island lighthouse, which was never in great repair to begin with, suddenly failed, and the ship was dashed against the rocks and sank. Since then, the cult, the esoteric Order of Dagon, has been trying to recover their gold from the sunken vessel. Now, if you're not familiar with the cult of Dagon and Call of Cthulhu, suffice to say that they're a creepy cult that worships an ancient ocean god, and they interbreed with deep ones, these fish monsters, often creating strange, bulbous-eyed humans who are said to have the Innsmouth look. They're a pretty creepy cult. Anyway, since that event, the Beacon Island's lighthouse keeper, George Cassidy, has also been finding the gold since it washed ashore near his lighthouse, and he's managed to collect quite a bit of it. The cult was willing to leave George alone for a few months, but he became too nosy about the source of the gold, and he was asking lots of folks in the area about the gold's origin.
Oh, I forget. What does an evil cult do in these circumstances? Anyone? Anyone? That's right. We just kill him. Get the deep ones.
So the cult decided that they needed to take George out, lest he expose them. And so they sent some of their cult's members to the island to kill George and steal back the gold. Now, during the scuffle, several lighthouse workers were killed, and the lighthouse lamp was hit by a stray shot and went out again. Meanwhile, at this exact moment, the investigators are passengers on a vessel in the same area. However, with the lighthouse suddenly broken, their ship hits rocks and takes on massive damage to its hull. The crew pushes the PCs out onto lifeboats and sends them to that island where the lighthouse is to wait for rescue. This is a strong opening. I love that it throws the players right into a serious survival situation. But I do have two nitpicks with the setup. First, the adventure shows that the mainland is 650 yards from Beacon Island, which is about a third of a mile. Now, most rowboats in the ocean can row at about 2 or 3 miles per hour, which means the PCs should be able to row from their shipwreck to land in under 10 minutes. So why are they bothering going to the island again? Anyway, this is a minor nitpick. I just push the land out much further, and I make it very clear that the sea is so rough and dangerous that it's doubtful that the rowboat will make it without being dashed apart by the waves and the rocks. Second, the adventure doesn't say what the crew is doing as their ship is sinking. Why aren't they evacuating too? So I have the ship captain tell the investigators that while he thinks it looks grim for his boat, he thinks that there's a chance that he and his crew can save the vessel and the cargo on board. But he doesn't want to risk the lives of the passengers, the PCs, so off they go to the lighthouse island. And then he tells them that if he can't save the ship, he'll meet them with his crew on the island in an hour or so. Of course, the men won't make it. They'll probably be eaten by deep ones at this point, and the PCs will hear their screams in the night at some point later in the adventure, which is a nice touch. Or if one of the PCs dies early, you can have a replacement character from the crew, make it to shore. Anyway, I make those two quick changes to the opening just to help the adventure run a little more smoothly and just make sure the PCs end up where they're supposed to be. Anyway, after a bit of hard rowing through the storm, the investigators make it ashore to Beacon Island. Here they'll make a few immediate discoveries. First, they'll find some unusual duck-like footprints in the mud around the island. They won't know this yet, but those footprints belong to young deep ones that have come ashore to kill the lighthouse keeper and his workers. The footprints, if the PCs follow them, lead to a dead body, one of the lighthouse workers who's been horrifically eviscerated with poisonous needles like embedded in his skin everywhere. More mysterious, this man seems to be an undercover FBI agent of some kind, but fortunately that means that they can find a revolver on his corpse, which is going to help them a lot as the adventure goes on. Near the lighthouse, the investigators will find a generator shed where the generator appears to be working, although the roof here is leaking and the rain is getting on top of the generator and the electrical equipment is sparking. I found it a little strange that the generator is described to have leaking rain all over it, and there's rules for repairing the roof, but it's working fine. There's no real reason to do that. So when I run this part of the adventure, I say that the generator is it's like starting up and failing again randomly, unless the PCs can fix that roof. That way, if they don't, at exactly the right time, I'm going to be able to plunge the island into complete darkness, which is going to scare the players and set up opportunities for those deep ones in the cult to attack the players. Hey, did we fix the generator roof, guys? We did, right? The last main location to explore is the lighthouse itself. And inside the lighthouse, the investigators will clearly see signs of a skirmish. Blood, shell casings, and a few golden coins are discarded everywhere here. And the PCs in the lighthouse can find the first method of escape from the island, a broken radio, which, if they can get it working, might be able to call the Coast Guard or another nearby boat for rescue. As the investigators explore the lighthouse, more and more of the story will unfold. They'll find journal entries and paintings and logs, all of which will reveal more about the cult of Dagon, the source of the gold, and what happened to the lighthouse crew that was stationed here. Eventually, the investigators will make it to the top of the lighthouse, where they'll find the body of George Cassidy, the lighthouse keeper, and the corpses of strange Deep One hybrids. Here, the investigators will find that the bulb and lamp lens of the lighthouse is shattered, having been hit by a stray bullet. Now, the adventure is a little unclear whether it can get repaired. It says there's no more lenses on the island and that any repair, which will take more time than the PCs really have, will be short-lived. I wasn't really sure what that all meant, so I always make a small change to this part of the adventure and say that yes, the lens is shattered and isn't going to get repaired, but the light, the lamp, can be repaired in a reasonable amount of time. And now this kind of fix won't let the lighthouse protect ships. It's just not enough for that, but it will be good enough for boats that are close to the island to land on the island, and also for the PCs to signal to them, maybe using Morse code, they can turn the lamp of the lighthouse on and off. This tweak gives the PCs a second way off the island in the event that they can't fix the radio. But just as the PCs make it to the top of the lighthouse, the cult and their Deep One allies realize that they have company, and they decide they are going to murder all of the investigators. And this part of the adventure generally turns into a bloodbath, with the PCs frantically firing away at Deep Ones who are coming up the lighthouse with whatever revolvers or whatever they've managed to find along the way. And usually it ends up with one or more investigators getting killed in grisly ways, dragged down the stairs, or thrown out the lighthouse, or just clawed to death. The exact timing of this attack is up to the keeper in this adventure, but I find that the writing here does a good job in separating out the PCs. Usually you have somebody trying to fix the generator or the radio, somebody else on top of the lighthouse, somebody else kind of keeping watch, which gives the GM the opportunity to kind of take the PCs by surprise. Each Deep One can kind of come out and ambush them one at a time, and eventually they all will converge on the lighthouse. It kind of plays out like an action horror movie, like Aliens, where it goes from just creepy and kind of unnerving to suddenly really intense and violent and dangerous, in a very short amount of time. Always works out when I run it, but it does require a little bit of GM expertise to know exactly when to strike with those Deep Ones at the end of this adventure. But if the PCs can signal for help, they have a chance of escaping the island and living to tell this tale. And that's the end of the Lightless Beacon. I told you it's a starter adventure. It's very short and very tightly written. It combines mystery, exploration, and a final burst of deadly violence. So what do I think? Does that all work and combine into a satisfying starter experience? Overall, I think so, but my compliment does come with a few caveats. On the positive, I think the setup of this adventure is fantastic. There's urgency from the moment the adventure starts, a clear objective, and between the storm, the weird footprints, and the dead bodies everywhere, the atmosphere is chilling from the moment the PCs land on the island. I also really like how the PCs can find clues across the island to kind of piece together the story of what happened here. So even as they are trying to solve the adventure by surviving, the story will unfold as the adventure progresses. And while this investigation won't directly impact the outcome of the adventure, for a starter adventure, I think this is a good thing, since missing clues in a more serious investigation or not assembling the story in the right way, that could short circuit or prevent an adventure from continuing, and that just won't happen here for even brand new players. Players who want to uncover a mystery in a good story can, and players who just want to get creeped out and attacked by monsters will get what they like too. But one of the things I don't like about this adventure is that, as written, it can feel very unwinnable. Nothing goes in the PC's favor in this adventure. I mean, sure, it's a Call of Cthulhu adventure, but you need to give the player some hope before dashing it all away, right? For example, if you think about it, there's really only one way to win the adventure. The PCs can use the lighthouse radio to call in a rescue. But the radio's broken, and only one of the pre-generated PCs has electrical repair, and even then it's at 50%. So it's just really a coin toss whether that will happen. Don't worry, boys, consider this radio fixed. And if they do repair it, then it kind of says the Coast Guard may come to the rescue, but realistically they're going to arrive long after the Deep One's attack. And even though I added a second option for the PCs to use Morse code by repairing the lamp to attract some help, well, as written, it's the same issue because only one PC has mechanical repair and it's at 50%. Don't worry, boys, consider this lighthouse lamp fixed. To make sure that the adventure doesn't hinge on just one or two dice rolls, I always say that there's toolkits or replacement parts located in the sheds on the island, which if the investigators bother to go get them, well, they'll get a bonus die to repairing the radio or the lamp. This also makes it more likely that the players are going to split up as somebody remembers to go get those toolkits. This really helps. And also, shortly before the Deep Ones show up, I have the PCs make a spot hidden roll to see a small boat approaching the island cautiously. I mean, after all, the foundered sinking ship that the PCs came from will probably be sending up emergency flares, and so maybe some local fishermen came to check it out. And this gives the PCs a chance to maybe take a rowboat out to that vessel and convince them to help. And also gives the Deep Ones a chance to try to drown the PCs as they do that. Oh, I also have the captain of the sinking ship at the very beginning of the scenario give one of the PCs a flare gun as they're escaping to the island. And they can use this flare gun at some point later, maybe to signal a boat that's nearby, although at the cost of probably attracting more Deep Ones to their location. Again, these changes just give the PCs a few more options to think about and debate on how they're going to get off the island. I also have a smaller issue with the adventure, and that is once the combat at the end starts, that Deep One attack is going to be really bloody. If you've seen my video on Deep One attacks, you know that the PC's odds of surviving just aren't that great. Especially since in Call of Cthulhu, guns are going to become pretty useless once these Deep Ones close into close combat. While the 4 Deep One younglings only have 6 hit points, they're just not nearly as mean as a real Deep One, they do deal enough damage to kill somebody in around 2 hits. And they shoot poisonous spines, which daze and pretty much disable their prey. So realistically, unless the PCs are incredibly lucky or tactical, you're probably looking at a TPK here. Also, there's a chance that if the battle at the end plays out in a certain way, it just won't play into Call of Cthulhu's strengths. If the PCs end up all holed up at the top of the lighthouse with Deep Ones coming up the stairs, it's going to end with just a lot of dice rolling. And it's going to feel more like a traditional boss battle in Dungeons and Dragons versus a horror game. and with less tactical options, since Call of Cthulhu doesn't give players like many combat options other than like flee or fight back. This is where I use my house rule, by the way, of allowing players to fire into close combat with their guns by rolling a penalty die. It helps a little bit. But as a GM, you really just want to avoid the scenario of like the PCs all bunkered down with deep ones coming in. It's just not going to be as much fun using the Call of Cthulhu rules. Instead, use the deep one's intelligence to trap the PCs and take them by surprise along the way. For example, when my players were once holed up in the lighthouse, I had one of the deep ones like kill the power on the generator, which forced some of the players to come out of the lighthouse, where then I had like one of the deep one hybrids like trap the guy inside the shed with a deep one youngling, and now the other PCs had to rescue him. Like, you just really need to use your smart GM tactics to separate the players and just make sure they just don't all barricade themselves in where it just becomes lots of die rolling. Oh, I also make one more final tweak to this adventure to give the PCs a little bit more optionality. The adventure describes that George Cassidy, the lighthouse keeper who's dead, has a heavy pouch of gold around his neck. I changed this, and instead I said that George hid his found gold in the larder of the lighthouse. And this is why the deep ones and the cult are still on the island. They just haven't found their gold yet. So if the investigators find the gold, they can basically trade it for their lives. If they give the gold back to the cult and don't ask any questions, the deep ones will vanish back into the ocean. I like that that's a kind of mysterious ending and in line with the cult's practices. After all, the cult didn't attack George for months until he started asking too many questions. So giving the PCs another way of like getting rid of the deep ones that isn't about shooting them in the head, like that goes a long way to let some of the players come up with some clever ideas on how to kind of escape the deep one's vengeance. So in the end, I'd recommend the Lightless Beacon as a starter adventure for a new group, especially if you think they're just not quite ready for a full-on investigative scenario like The Haunting or Edge of Darkness. Those scenarios are classics for a reason, but I've also seen some groups get stuck with hunting for clues or struggling with the slower pace and open-ended nature of those adventures. While the Lightless Beacon probably feels more like a horror movie than a Lovecraftian tale, you still get the feel of Call of Cthulhu with this one. A lonely Massachusetts location, deep ones, references to Innsmouth and cursed artifacts. You also get an action-packed ending that will probably appeal to players coming from other action-heavy systems like Dungeons & Dragons, although this one's going to be a lot more deadly. Well, I hope this review was helpful. If you've played or run in the Lightless Beacon, I'd love to know what your experience was like. How does it compare to other starter adventures in your mind? And if you want to see more reviews like this one, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. If you don't, the cult of Dagon will find out, and it won't be pretty. Until next time, I'm JC, and just remember, if you have a choice of visiting a lonely rocky island with an extinguished lighthouse on it, or rowing the 650 yards to the beach, just row to the beach. It's all gonna work out better for you. I promise.